Story 1. I'm a police officer. Tonight we kept getting the same call. All officers on duty, we have just received a call from a woman claiming that something is outside her home. Report to the scene immediately. I immediately step on the gas pedal and drive onto the highway. I look over at my partner Christian and give him an eyebrow raise. You think we gonna see a monster tonight? I joke about the call. Shut the fuck up, Dawson, Christian responds to me, laughing. They said we should take every call seriously, but fuck it, I guess. I was supposed to be home in an hour so me and my wife, Michelle, could have a late night TV dinner, but it seems that at this rate, we wouldn't be able to. I was too nervous to call her at the moment because I didn't want her to get upset at my possible absence from home tonight. We continued driving down the highway and looked at the given address from the dispatcher. It was only a couple more minutes away, so I sped up a little bit to get there quicker. You think you're gonna have that TV dinner with your wife tonight now? Christian asks me. I shrug, watching the cars and street lights pass by. If this is the last call, hopefully. We haven't been able to do anything together for weeks, I sigh. I really miss the times we used to have together. I get what you mean. Work is a pain in the ass. Let's just get this call done. It's probably nothing, Christian reassures me. I take a turn and go into a silent neighborhood, pulling into a row of houses. I drive towards a diverting two-story house. I double-check the address and look back at it. We were here. We get out of our car and we see the distraught woman who made the call outside of her home, awaiting our arrival. We quickly make our way over to her as she steps off her porch. I could see that she has been crying, seeing a stream of tears running down her eyes. Ma'am, it's okay, we're here now. Is the guy still outside your home? I put a hand on her shoulder and calm her down. I hear her sniffle. It's not a person. The woman cries. I can't even explain what it was doing. She stops mid-sentence and starts breaking down. Me and Christian look at each other and exchange concerned gazes before turning back to the woman. Where do you think it is? Is it still here? Are you even sure it's not a person? Christian says with a little more order in his voice. The woman continues sniffling. It's in the backyard. I'm sure it wasn't a person, just hurry. We tell the woman to go inside her home as we pull out our guns from our holsters and flashlights since there wasn't a source of light coming from her backyard. We made our way into the backyard and flicked on our flashlights. As we stepped foot into the grass, I immediately got an eerie and unsettling feeling setting in me. I didn't hear or see anything yet, but I also didn't feel safe. Me and Christian moved our flashlights around and moved the light throughout the entire yard, taking prompt glances, but there was nothing in sight. You seeing anything? I say to Christian. He shakes his head. Nope, seems like bullshit so far, he responds, still glancing around. We both notice a deck beside us that connects to the house, and we move our flashlights below it. We didn't see anything from where we were standing, but we saw wooden poles holding the deck up that was blocking a portion of our view. We decided to check underneath the deck. The deck was pretty tall, so we walked towards it and just walked underneath it, moving our flashlights up and down to see if anyone was hiding down there. We figured it was pretty likely since before when we've gotten calls like this, people did hide under decks frequently. There wasn't anything under this deck though. For the most part, it was empty. It was long in length, so we walked across and checked it out in its entirety, yet we still didn't see anyone or anything. I lowered my flashlight and felt that something was off about all of this. I shook it off and was ready to rule this a false alarm when I heard Christian say, "Dawson, come here." I made my way over to him and saw him hunched over in the far left corner of the deck. I got beside him and tried to see what he was looking at. "What is it?" I say as he gives me a confused look. Christian moves his hands through the dirt, picking up whatever he was looking at, and hands it to me, which I reluctantly take. I give a look at it. It was the leg of a dog, blood covered on the fur with teeth plunged into it. I gasped and dropped the leg, looking at Christian, who was equally as freaked out. "What the fuck is this?" I ask him. He gives no response. There was just shock written all over his face. I could see it in his eyes. I knew how much Christian hated seeing dead animals or animal remains, so I didn't question him. I looked back down at the leg and examined it. It looked like something was eating it, but as it bit down, all of its teeth came out of its gums, but I wasn't sure. It was a weird, disturbing sight and something I can't explain. I hesitated before taking the dog leg as evidence. I could distinguish a horrible, rotting smell to it, and the leg felt flabby. I wanted to vomit, but I knew I needed to take it with us. Me and Christian both get up as I started to feel pale. Holding the leg of a possible dead dog didn't sit right with me. Christian patted me on the back. I'll go in and talk with the woman. You can go sit in the car, all right? Christian seemed to be fine now. I nod my head and gulp. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I put the leg in the trunk and slam it down, feeling my phone vibrate in my pocket. I take it out. Michelle was calling me. I take a deep breath and answer it, putting my phone towards my ear. Hey, Michelle, I say into the phone, still feeling uneasy about the situation. Honey, are you okay? You're not home yet, I hear Michelle talking to the phone. I look at the ground below me. Yeah, I know, I'm probably going to have a late shift tonight, sorry, I respond with guilt. Oh, that's fine, I guess. Is something happening? Yup, everything is fine. Just had to respond to a weird call and... I think about the dog's leg. Found a peculiar item. I sighed into the phone. The other end is silent for a few moments. Well, I hope everything really is fine. It is. Trust me on this one. It's not a big deal, I say. I see Christian walk out of the house. All right then, but stay safe, Dawson, please. The call ends. Me and Christian get into the patrol car, sitting there for a minute, thinking about what just happened. I examine the neighborhood. It was dark. Almost every house had no light reflecting onto the street, and no street lamps were on. Just darkness. The vibe was unlike anything I've been in before, even in my 9 years as a police officer. What did the lady say? I finally say to Christian, beginning to start the car. I asked if she had any cameras so we could see anything enter her backyard, but she said she didn't. She said she saw some kind of creature in her yard eating some kind of animal. He motions his head to the back of the car, where the dog leg is. I understood what it meant. We probably need to take that dog leg to the station and check it out. Something feels supernatural about this. I went to say something, but I didn't. I agreed. No human could just rip a leg clean from a dog, and I don't think any human would have the audacity to try eating it. I wasn't going to jump to conclusions, but the call was something to take into account. We started to get a signal coming from a dispatcher on my radio. I quickly turn on my radio as me and Christian listen. We have just received 2 calls from people saying that something was in the backyard of their home. Officers are already en route to one address. I need other officers on scene at the other immediately. Christian and I lock eyes on each other out of confounding fear. Weren't we just at a call about this? We didn't say a word as I received the address and started speeding to it. It was only 6 minutes away, so not far, but something wasn't right about this. Something was going on and it wasn't good. We hear the radio crackling on again and I start dreading what it's gonna be about. I hear a dispatcher's voice come on again. We have just received another call from someone saying that something was walking around their property. We need officers on the scene. I repeat, we have just received a 4th call that something was walking around someone's property. What the fuck is happening? Christian says. My hands start shaking on the steering wheel as I take a turn. Something's not right, man. My voice quivers. Snap out of it, Dawson. It's gonna be fine. Christian tries to unnerve me. I shake my head. The radio crackles on again. Me and Christian listen carefully. We have received a call from a man saying that something was hanging out at the side of his house. Officers are on the scene now. Shit, I mutter to myself. I continue heading to the address that was originally sent to us, speeding up now. We were getting closer to our destination, and never has something happened like this. We've never gotten multiple calls in a row about someone being in people's yards. This was different though. These were reports on something in people's yards, whatever the hell that meant. It's never been on this caliber before. We pulled towards a house on the street and we immediately had our guns drawn. After the last call we checked out, and after hearing all of these other reports, we weren't taking this one lightly because something was seriously wrong. Me and Christian peeked our heads in the backyard but didn't see anything. The lights in the house were on, so at least we knew the resident was still okay. That was until we heard the sound of a man giving the most blood-curdled scream I have ever heard from inside the home. We immediately rushed to the front door, preparing to enter with force. Christian gives me a scared look, and I give him a signal to be brave. I look at the door and take a deep breath as I continue hearing screams. I wince as I take a step back from the door. I sprint toward the door and bash my entire body into it with all my force right as the screaming stops, knocking the door down as I come crashing down to the floor shoulder first. I see Christian run into the house with his gun, yelling out police. The screaming was still absent, and I began thinking that we were too late. The living room and dining room were in sight from the front door, and we didn't see anything in either room. That's when we decided to check the kitchen. I sensed that the kitchen was right around the corner, so we walked towards the living room and took a hard left around the wall. As we entered the kitchen, we saw the remains of a man, hunched over the sink, mutilated from the neck down to his calf. I gagged a little bit, feeling the need to throw up. I put my head down, lowering my gun. We were too late. I didn't have time to beat myself up about it though, because I shortly felt Christian desperately trying to get my attention. I raise my head and see him pointing at the kitchen window. The kitchen window faced the entirety of the backyard, and I saw a dark figure that wasn't built or even shaped like a human quickly crawl out of the backyard, out of sight. Christian and I quickly moved to the back door and swing it open, swiftly making our way down the steps and sprinting farther into the backyard. We no longer saw the figure anywhere and rushed to the backyard gate, and we still didn't see anything. We ran and opened the gate and sprinted back into the front yard, but again, no sign of the figure we just saw. We lower our guns and sigh in disappointment. My question was though, what was that thing, and how did it get away so fast? I hear my radio crackle on again as I start to slowly walk towards the car. Officers have found a woman dead in her backyard. She has been impaled through the fence. It looked like she died just minutes ago. We need paramedics on the scene right away. What the fuck is happening? I hear Christian say. He slumps against the garage door and lowers down to the ground. I felt awful for Christian. It was clear this was a lot for him to digest. I understood, though. This was also unexplainable. I got in the car and slammed the door shut, unsure what to do. I surveyed the street and tried to search for that creature more, but I still didn't see it. It truly just disappeared, gone with the wind. I heard my radio crackle on again. The dispatchers got another call from somebody saying that something was in their backyard. They needed officers on the scene immediately. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was convinced I was living in a hellish, repetitive nightmare, but I did the only thing that I could have done in that state I was in. I pulled out my radio and said, "We have found a man dead in his home." I repeat, we've found a man dead in his home. I got home an hour later. It was almost 1 a.m. at that point and I was exhausted. We had to wait at that house for paramedics to arrive and tell them what had happened. We had to take the dog leg to the station and explain to the sheriff what happened at that house, and it was a whole process that I won't bore anybody with. I reached for my keys in my pocket and fumbled with them for a second before inserting them into the lock and opening the door, breathing a sigh of relief that I was finally where I wanted to be. I threw my radio on a chair next to the front door, forgetting to turn it off. My joy was instantaneously taken away from me when I saw my wife's bloody head, hanging from the ceiling. I screamed and fell to my knees and started crying. This was already a horrible night. I couldn't have lost Michelle too, not her. "Honey?" I heard Michelle's voice from the stairs, shortly before I heard her scream too. I got confused as I raised my head up and looked at the stairs, and there she was. Standing on the stairs, looking at the ceiling in shock. I looked back at the head on the ceiling. It looked almost exactly like Michelle. But how? If her head was there but she was alive on the stairs, then that meant... What the fuck? I didn't know how else to express my thoughts. I look at my overwrought wife. Did you hear anyone come in or anything? Michelle looked at me. I could see how terrified and utterly bewildered she was. Dawson, Michelle, this is important. Have you seen anything outside the house? No. I didn't hear anything coming either. I figured she was telling the truth. That still doesn't explain how identical the head was to my wife. The facial features, the hair, everything. I slowly got back up to my feet, walked past the stairs, and went towards the kitchen. Something was drawing me there, and my gut was telling me to go. What are you doing? What are you gonna do about this? Decapitated head? I heard my wife yell at me. I stuttered for a few seconds before putting my words together. I know, Hold on. I walked into the kitchen, looked at the counter, and nearly had a heart attack. Michelle? I shouted, but I didn't hear a response back. I continued looking at the counter. It was a head, covered in blood that was almost identical to me. I tried to put two and two together, but I just couldn't. I didn't fucking know what was happening anymore. My mouth was agape, searching for more words to say, but I was fearful of this situation. These heads, who were they originally, and how did they get here? I felt my phone buzz in my pocket and I pulled it out. It was a text from Christian. Normally he doesn't text me this late, so I was confused. I opened it. I looked closely at the text. It read, "I'm still on my shift and we got a call from someone saying that they saw something in their neighbors' yards." I got the address they provided. "It's your house. Don't panic, I'm on my way." My heart dropped reading this. I still didn't know what things were going into people's yards to do whatever the hell knows, but I didn't want to find out. I was unsure of everything at this point. Michelle? I continued saying my wife's name, but I still didn't hear a response back from her. I walked out of the kitchen and saw her standing at one of the back doors by the dining room, looking out to the backyard, shaking. I went next to her to see what she was looking at. That's when I saw it. The same dark figure I saw earlier was standing in the middle of our backyard, staring dead at me. I could make out some of its features this time, though. It was tall and bulky, its arms and claws were so long that it just looked unnatural. I couldn't make out any of its facial features, but I could see its eyes. There was nothing but darkness in them. I didn't feel anything anymore looking at it. I lost all feeling in my body and mind. I only felt fear and trepidation. I felt like a bomb ready to explode. What was once me responding to calls living this, was now me living through it myself. There was a strong ambience now, and the creature had an emanation that made my heart beat faster and faster. My actions and thoughts started to feel that they were getting flooded and breached with something otherworldly. I was feeling abstracted now. One thought and one thought only crossed my mind. My phone was still in my hand. I opened it, dialing 911. I looked at Michelle as she was inching closer to me by the second, not saying a word. I looked back at the thing that was out in our backyard. It got into a crawling position and it was making noises that I couldn't even tell what it sounded like. I put my phone to my ear as I hear a dispatcher pick up. 911, what's your emergency? I don't say anything for a moment. All I can do is look at the creature. Look at the being that was in my backyard. What's your emergency? The dispatcher repeats themselves. I finally find the courage to say something. Something I didn't think I was going to say that night. Something is standing out in my backyard. I start to hear my radio crackle seconds after saying that. Story 2. The elevator at my office stopped between the first and second floor. I used to work at a reputable audit company. Those familiar with me will recognize the company. I'm certain my colleagues will come across this on Reddit, as I've seen them browse the site during office hours. It's been approximately 2 days since the incident, and I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Each passing night, the shadows in my room seem to grow darker and have more substance. I fear I'm losing my sanity. My fellow coworkers, as you read this, I'm uncertain if I'll still be alive. However, please, heed my warning. You must put an end to this curse before it's too late. It happened on the night of June 23rd. It was around 11 p.m., and anyone passing by the office building would have noticed that only the lights on the 3rd floor were on. My colleague Wise and I were the only ones working late, as we had an upcoming deadline and, thus, had some unfinished tasks. It wouldn't be fair to solely blame us for the delay, as our client had taken their sweet time in providing the necessary data. Such was the life of an auditor. My fingers glided across the keyboard of my laptop, the sound of typing echoed through the empty floor. Both of us were surviving on caffeine at this point, evident from the scattered paper cups on the table. In the midst of entering an Excel formula, a faint scraping sound caught my attention. I had paused briefly to double-check my calculations, and that's when I heard it. As soon as I paid attention to it, it abruptly stopped. I looked up from my laptop, surveying the dimly lit office, but found no source for the sound. Wise, sitting to my right, seemed too busy with his work to notice. Shaking my head, I returned to my tasks, convinced that I had simply imagined it. However, as I looked back at the laptop screen, the scraping noise resumed, faint but distinct. I immediately stood up, and once again, the sound stopped. I scanned the room and heard Wise making a strange noise. I turned toward him, and he burst into laughter. "Bruh, you should have seen your face," Wise said, struggling to contain his amusement. "Dude, that scared the hell out of me. Don't pull such pranks when we're up against a deadline." Yeah. You definitely need some sleep. You're losing it right now." "I'll get some rest once I finish this," I replied, plopping back into my chair and letting out a sigh. I hate my job. Not much longer, right? This is our last day. Do you think our replacements will be able to complete this? Probably. We gave them a thorough briefing about the work earlier. I looked at Wise, and he slowly closed his laptop. "You're leaving, huh? I have a lot on my mind right now. I need to take a step back." "Sure, I'll probably leave in a few minutes as well." "You go ahead." Wise started gathering his belongings, and in the midst of packing, he asked, "Have you heard from Ashad Bashir? He left the company a week ago, and we haven't heard a word from him." "Same here. I've tried contacting him multiple times, but his phone was turned off." "You think it's related to that rumored curse?" "Nonsense. Do you believe in such things?" "I don't, but lately, it seems more than just a rumor, doesn't it? They say those who leave the company vanish. Ashad not answering our calls would definitely have a logical explanation, rather than some absurd curse. He did say that his phone was causing all sorts of problems before he left." "Sure, but what about Sarah and Ahmed? They both had plans to move to China, so it's possible that they haven't had a chance to reach out to us yet. Junaid, it's been 3 months, and Ahmed, your work buddy, hasn't even contacted you. I understand that his silence is bothering you, but I have faith that he will eventually get in touch with us." Wise didn't seem satisfied with my response. He stared blankly at the vacant office space. "Don't worry about anything. You'll be fine. That rumor is just a tactic to keep us in the company," I assured him, giving his shoulder a pat. "I want to believe that too. Anyway, I'm leaving now. Let's grab lunch sometime and talk shit about this company again," Wise said weakly, letting out a faint laugh. "Sure thing, buddy." We shook hands firmly, and Wise picked up his bag, heading towards the elevator. The doors closed, plunging the space into darkness once again. I returned to my desk and resumed my work. About 20 minutes later, I stretched my arms. Man, the newbies are going to have a field day with this assignment. I closed my laptop, preparing to pack up. I gathered the empty paper cups and tossed them into the nearby bin. As I stood by the elevator, I took one last glance at the empty office. Never thought I'd witness this day, especially not after 4 years of being here. With that, I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and the descent began, the floor numbers gradually ticking down from 3. Surprisingly, the elevator jolted and came to a sudden stop. Well, that was quicker than expected, I muttered. I looked at the elevator panel, only to find the lower portion of 2 and the upper portion of 1. What in the world? Realizing that the doors hadn't opened, I pressed the buttons and attempted to force them apart, but to no avail. Of all the times, it had to be today. I decided to call the security guard, Kashif. I picked up my phone, and at that moment, the elevator doors opened. Before me lay a dark corridor, without a single light. Glancing back at the panel, I noticed that it still displayed the same numbers. I tapped the panel and pressed the buttons, but nothing happened. Letting out a sigh, I adjusted the strap of my bag and stepped out of the elevator. As soon as I did, the doors closed shut. I turned around, only to see the elevator panel indicating that it was descending to the ground level. You've got to be kidding me. I found myself in an unfamiliar corridor. It didn't match any floor layout I was familiar with. With my phone's flashlight activated, I cautiously proceeded forward, noticing a partially open door a few meters away. In a final desperate attempt, I pushed the elevator button, but it remained fixed on the ground level. Admitting defeat, I slowly approached the door. Carefully, I pushed the door open, my body on high alert for reasons I couldn't quite understand. Illuminating the room with my phone's light, I discovered empty workstations and chairs. I scanned the area, moving the light from one corner to another. In all my 4 years at the company, I had never seen this room before. I searched for a light switch, however, there were none, and I realized there were no windows either. Odd. The only sound that came in the room was the sound of rushing air from the ventilation system. As I approached the first workstation, I noticed the name Akhtar Ali taped to the desk, accompanied by a photo of a man in his late 30s. I assumed the man was Akhtar. Strangely enough, I had never seen or met him in the office before. I directed my flashlight towards the adjacent desk, where the name Parveen Nabil was written, a name I had never heard in the office either. Something felt off. I hurriedly passed by each table, each taped with a name tag and a picture of the person assigned to it. As I approached the end of the table, a particular name caught my attention. There was no mistaking it. Moving closer, I confirmed that Ashad Bashir was written there, accompanied by a picture taken on his last day of work. I took a step back from the table, feeling uneasy at what I had just looked at. Did the office maintain some bizarre memorial for all the staff members who had left? It sounded absurd, but that's exactly what was before me. There were 2 desks next to Ashad's. I moved towards it, making me shiver at what I saw. The desks had mine and Awai's names taped on. What's more shocking was that the picture of either of us was the ones we took a couple of hours ago, when everyone had left. What in the world is going on? This is madness, I muttered. I knew I had to leave. Something was severely wrong. At the far end of the room, there was another door. I approached it and cautiously opened it. Immediately, a horrendous, rotting smell invaded my nostrils, nearly causing me to throw up. Covering my nose, I took a step forward but tripped over something and stumbled to the floor. In the process, my phone was thrown a few feet away, its light illuminating the room. As I slowly rose, I noticed an arm lying next to my feet. Startled, I stood up, only to be confronted with a horrifying sight. The floor was covered in dried blood, and several hooks with chains dangled from the ceiling. Lifeless bodies hung from those hooks, each with their mouths impaled on a hook. Limbs were strewn across the floor, as every body had been gruesomely dismembered. I began to hyperventilate. What in God's name was I witnessing? This was sheer madness. Trembling, I reached for my phone, and as I retrieved it, I recognized the first body. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was Ashad Bashir. The corpse had decomposed slightly, but the face was still recognizable. 3 rooms stood at the end of the room, one of which was illuminated. I hurriedly made my way toward it, peeking through the door's small window. Inside, a huge, obese man stood, easily 7 feet tall and weighing over 500 pounds. His body was covered in scars and stitches, with a prominent red scar across his bald head. Gripping a massive meat cleaver, he was busy dismembering a lifeless figure on a table before him. With each strike, limbs fell off, and blood sprayed in all directions. I couldn't see the face of the body from my position. "Gotta love it when the little fishy walks right into my hands," he chuckled, his voice hoarse. Shocked and terrified, I stepped away from the door, realizing I needed to escape this place. I heard movement in the room and quickly ducked into the next room. Just as I slightly closed the door behind me, the man emerged. Although I couldn't see what he was doing, I heard the sound of chains rattling and the piercing of flesh. Footsteps echoed again, and it seemed the man was leaving. The footsteps halted, followed by the man sniffing the air, chuckling with delight. Oh boy, looks like another little fishy was wandering around here. I do love me some good hide and seek." With that, it sounded like he exited the slaughter room and entered the memorial room. Gathering my courage, I left the room I had hidden in, refraining from using my phone's flashlight to avoid being spotted. I used the light coming from the butcher's room to navigate my way to the butcher's room. The room was a blood-splattered chaos. In the center stood a large table, with limbs on it from the previous victim. I frantically searched the room for a key, a button, anything that could help me escape. But there was nothing. Overwhelmed with despair, I collapsed onto the floor. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. All hope seemed lost. That monster was sure to return any minute and kill me. At that moment, I noticed a large finger hanging on a cleaver keychain from one of the walls. I got up and grabbed it. Then, I heard the door behind me creak open, and I felt a force pulling me upright. Well, the little fishy has strayed too far from the fishing net. I turned and saw one of the ugliest faces I had ever seen, grinning at me. I struggled to break free from his grip, but he was too strong. Oh, the little fishy is putting up a fight? I do love me some strong fish. He flashed a toothy grin and threw me onto the table. Placing his enormous hand on my neck, he began to strangle me. "Now, playtime is over, fishy. Please die for me and create the music of death." He brought his face closer to mine, a sadistic smile spreading across his lips. I clawed at his hands, but his grip tightened. I gasped for air, and that made the man laugh. "Give me more music, fish." Summoning my last ounce of strength, I clenched the cleaver keychain tightly and drove it into his eye with all my might. The man howled in agony and stumbled back. Coughing and gasping for air, I scrambled to my feet. With one goal in mind to escape, I sprinted out of the room. "You piece of shit. I'll skin you alive," roared the butcher. I took out my phone and illuminated my path with its light. Hastily finding the door to the memorial room, I entered it. The room was now a mess, with overturned tables. I didn't have much time to assess the full extent of the butcher's rampage. I exited the memorial room, rushed down the corridor, and reached the elevator. Frantically pressing the buttons, I received no response. Come on. Despite multiple attempts, the elevator remained motionless. I heard a loud explosion behind me, signaling that the man had entered the memorial room. Ready to give up, I remembered the giant finger I had picked up. I decided to use it to press the elevator button, and to my relief, the elevator started moving up. The elevator doors opened, and with that, the memorial room doors as well. The light from the elevator shone in the corridor, and I saw him running towards me. "Get here, you little fish." He raised his cleaver and hurled it towards me. I used the finger and pressed the ground level. The doors closed, stopping the cleaver from impaling me. The elevator descended and stopped at the ground level. The doors opened, revealing the reception area of the office, with the security guard Kashif sitting there. As he saw me, he quickly stood and approached. "What happened to you? You're a complete mess, and what's with all the blood?" he asked, bewildered. There. I. He. I struggled to form any words. With that, I bolted out of the front door. I ran and ran, not even bothering to call a taxi. I needed to distance myself from that place and everything I had witnessed. I reached my house in no time as I didn't live too far from the office. I locked all the doors and hid in my room. I don't know how, but somehow I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I attempted to call a wise, but received no response. I tried calling the security guard, Kashif, but his phone was powered off. Each number I attempted to call yielded the same result, no connection. During all this confusion, I noticed a text message notification on my phone. It was from a wise, sent to me just after he left the office last night. The message read, "Junaid, what the hell is going on in this office? Why the hell are there dead bodies being kept here?" Story 3. An office romance. It was the second or third day in my new job when I noticed her. I was still at the stage of trying to impress my new boss, and my role required a degree of concentration, so it was best if I focused on the task in hand, rather than her, but still, she was perfect. I was young, ambitious, and delighted I had secured this position. My new boss seemed to like me. I enjoyed the work. I didn't want to mess anything up by getting myself into an awkward situation with this woman, no matter how lovely. The next day I saw her again, a brief glimpse over the shoulder of my colleague, her beautiful face and hair the color of winter sunshine, her pale skin and lips curved in a slight smile. Was I imagining that was for me? Blushing, I returned to my work. I am a 23-year-old man, a shy boy really still. I had no experience with women. Her quiet beauty appealed to me. All women scared me, this much was true. Shrieking, lively women in the bars I reluctantly went to with my few friends. I had been knocked back every single time I had plucked up the courage, after 2 or 3 beers, to approach one. I didn't bother anymore, but I was still looking for love, ever hopeful. That night I Googled her. I'd seen her name on a document at work and pretended that it didn't excite me to think I could find out more about her. The nature of my work meant she would soon be gone. They never stick around for long. She was a temporary distraction really, but a lovely one. After a few minutes I found what I needed to know, her name, age. She was single as far as I could see. Her Facebook full of happy pictures and kind words from friends and family. She was popular, this smiling girl. Still, could I be so unprofessional as to approach her? In a moment of fuck it, maybe it was that beer and a half I'd had. Mother doesn't like me to drink in the house, but I was feeling wild. I decided I would. Tomorrow. I had overtime to do. I was pretty sure she'd be around. I'd get to know her then. It was with some trepidation that I dressed for work the next day. My uniform was necessary, but I used some of the aftershave bought for me by Mother. She often did little things for me like this, usually with sad sigh and the familiar refrain, "When will you bring a girl home to Father and I?" I couldn't help but think that it might be this time. With furiously crossed fingers on each hand, I thought about her and imagined it all going my way for once. I also wore what I regarded as my lucky shirt. That was what I had been wearing that red letter day, that amazing day I was smiled at by a girl in my last job. She had also been beautiful and blonde. Turned out she was just being friendly, but I shouldn't be bitter and angry, not after all this time. She's gone now anyway, thanks to me, they said. At work I was excited all day. I couldn't eat my lunch. I made a few little mistakes, nothing noticeable, but I worried my new boss would be angry. He was the best friend of my parents and had been kind giving me this job. It had been quite a long time since I'd worked and I was out of practice, but so far he's been patient and kind. I was also worried she'd already gone. Like I said, people don't stick around here for long. I watched out for her all day. I didn't have a reason or excuse to go looking for her, so I just had to sit tight and hope for a glance and maybe the opportunity to get her alone for a minute. Around 6:30 p.m. that evening, hours into a long shift, it had been a busy few days for one reason or another, I got my chance. My boss, kind man that he is, offered to go and fetch some food for our evening meal. He told me I'd worked hard and had a good first week. He would be pleased to report back to my parents that he was happy to keep me on, that I was no trouble. With a chuckle he told me not to get used to this and I would be bringing him his meals in future if we ever worked late. With that he left. I was alone and I decided to get on with it. Steeling myself, running a sweaty hand through my hair and swallowing hard, straightening my tie, and with one eye on the door I approached where I hoped she would be at this time. Happily, she was still here, still beautiful, quietly lovely with sunshine hair and pale, pale skin. I don't know what came over me at that moment. I am a shy boy, inexperienced with women, but I just knew this was going to be okay, and if I kissed her she wouldn't react like all the others, she wouldn't scream and push me away, shouting in my face, "What are you doing? How dare you? Pervert." Pervert, I'd heard that word more than a few times. My own mother once called me that and then clapped a hand to her shocked mouth, as if she was the one who had done something wrong. Not this time. This time I was sure I was right. I hadn't misread the signals. She had never turned away from me when our eyes briefly met, never laughed at my shy glances. I was sure she was mine. Feeling brave and sure, I placed my hand on her shoulder. Her bare skin was cool and smooth. She didn't move, didn't shrug me off. Her blue eyes remained fixed on mine. In a moment of incredible bravery, heart beating out of my chest, I leant to kiss her. It was my first, my only kiss. I only broke off when I heard a shocked noise, a throat clearing and a sigh of infinite sadness. Stood in the door of the mortuary where I now worked, a bag containing our meal clutched in his right hand, was my new boss. I knew it looked bad. I knew I'd been unprofessional, but as I glanced down at her fixed stare and those blue lips, I didn't feel regret. This girl, the girl I was holding in my arms, wasn't like all the rest. Story 4. It's 3 a.m. and people in my office haven't stopped staring at their computer screens. I absent-mindedly flicked the switch to turn off my computer monitor. It was 5:30 p.m. and I was finally done for the day. I couldn't wait to get out of there. It was Friday and I was eager for the weekend. Yearning to wind down and forget about work for a day or two. I worked for a publishing house called Raven Mill Books as an editorial assistant, a lifelong dream of mine. I spent most of my day reading. Granted, the stories aren't always compelling, but hey, I still loved immersing myself in the work of others, whatever it may be. I turned to face Patricia, the girl that always sat next to me. I think she was in marketing. I was never sure and she wasn't very talkative. "I'm done for the day, see you Monday," I said, picking up my handbag. My bag fell from my weak grasp as I glimpsed her face. She had this permanent grimace that seemed to be fixed to her features. Her mouth was twisted, as if she was in pain, and the color of her flesh was that of pure snow. It was as if someone had sculpted her face to be in a perpetual state of fear. But it was her eyes that chilled the blood in my veins. They were a deep, dark red, like two little scarlet ruby diamonds, and I could see tiny droplets forming on the edge of her damp eyelashes. Tears. I had never seen fear like it. It was overwhelming. It terrified me. "Pat?" I said meekly. She was so still, so silent, an unmoving statue. I touched her arm and it was cold, hard and rigid. If I didn't know better, and if it weren't for the distorted expression that lined her face, I'd think she was dead. She was looking at something on her screen. Something that was making her look and act this way. I tore my gaze away from her ghostly face and directed it toward her screen. It was blank, nothing but white noise and static. What in the hell was she looking at? I wondered to myself. I stood up, hoping to call someone. Anyone. This wasn't normal, I knew that. Perhaps Pat had suffered some sort of breakdown? That thought had crossed my mind. But then I would remember her face and the fear would grip me tighter than ever. Something wasn't right. When I scanned the room, I nearly passed out. They were all just sitting there, faces glued to their screens with wet and bleeding eyes. Every single one of them. I saw my friend Triss, over in sales, and her boss Miranda. All wide-eyed and unblinking. I saw Ursula, Ruby, Nathan and Tom, all my friends, everyone I knew. Every single one staring at their computer screens. I walked toward Triss, my eyes filling with tears. Triss? The room was so quiet, so completely still that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, beating incessantly. It was deafening. Triss didn't respond, didn't even flinch. Just continued to sit and stare at her screen, eyes ruby red and weeping. As I neared, I noticed her trembling, ever so slightly, the fear just radiating off her body. She was glowing, almost. My hand reached out to touch her auburn hair. It felt dry to the touch, hardened, as if someone had poured wax all over it. My hand traveled down to her shoulder. I prodded it gently. No response. I'd just about had enough, so I spun her chair around so that she faced me. Triss. Snap the fuck out of it, I said, shaking her. I stared into her glassy eyes and saw my own horrified face reflected in them. At that moment, she began convulsing violently. Her body shook with a fervor I had never seen before. Her bloodshot eyes rolled back into her head, glistening in the pale evening light as she shook. I loosened my grip and stood, watching in horror. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call the police and the ambulance, the whole fucking cavalry. I attempted to dial 999, but my heart sank when I saw that there was no reception, no fucking signal. My phone lay, defeated in my sweated palm. I looked at the quivering body of Triss and my eyes widened in horror as I watched her change, morph into something entirely different. Her convulsions had worsened and she had fallen to the floor. Her mouth was grotesquely askew, white foam dribbled from the sides. I could see her veins, they were thick and bulging a deep, overpowering red. I saw them quiver as the blood coursed through them. Then she screamed, her mouth opened unbelievably wide, and within I saw that she had bitten her tongue nearly in half. I felt powerless. All I could do was sit there and watch her die from whatever the fuck was happening around me. Her veins continued to swell, growing ever bigger, and before I could blink, they fucking exploded. Before she succumbed, I heard her whisper something. Something that sent shivers down my spine. "Mom, please." I didn't know why those words escaped her dying mouth. Why was she begging? You see, Triss' mom had been dead for 3 years. She died in a car accident, was impaled by a fucking truck apparently. It was macabre. Before Triss' blood had a chance to dry on my brow, Miranda caught my attention. She was concealed behind her screen so I couldn't see her properly, but I could see the top of her head from where I was. Something about her shrouded demeanor frightened me even more. I knew what she was doing, of course. I already knew she was glued to her screen like everyone else, but it was what I could hear that sent spikes down my heart. She was fucking laughing. I observed her head move up and down like a bobbing apple. I got to my feet, slowly, with my eyes closed. Believe it or not, I was too scared to look. When I did eventually open them, I let out this inhuman howl that I am certain was not my voice. Miranda's face was a ghastly, terrifying sight. Her eyes were unmoving, unblinking, just like the rest of them, but there was something strange and different about her mouth. She was smiling. A wide, unearthly smile that spread from ear to ear. Tears streamed down her face. I could see the dread in her eyes. Why was she smiling? Laughing even? I didn't know, and I don't think I wanted to know. Miranda? I didn't know what else to fucking say. She didn't answer me, of course. Just continued to stare at the nothingness on her screen, laughing quietly, her body trembling. Her laugh grew louder and louder with each passing minute. It was unnatural, like a witch's cackle. It was as if she couldn't catch her breath with each bout of ever-increasing laughter. It was downright creepy. She wouldn't stop. Her laugh became deep, guttural, and dry. As if her throat was parched, as dry as a bone. Then she began choking, hands clawing at her throat. Still, she never once shifted her gaze away from her screen. In between fits of suffocation, she managed to say something. "Philip, why are you doing this to me?" I didn't know Miranda well, so I had no clue who Philip was. Her head fell, hitting her desk with a bang. I heard her skull crack. I was fucking done. I had to get out of there. I rushed downstairs, but when I got there, I realized that I couldn't leave. The doors were sealed shut. I banged and shouted at the door, my salvation just meters away from me, but whatever was happening in this building, it didn't want me to leave. I couldn't leave. Why was I the only one that didn't get affected? I turned my screen off before everyone else, I was sure of that. So it was pure, dumb luck. That was when I saw something pale and gangling just out of the corner of my eye, just out of reach. It moved so swiftly I was sure it was a trick of the light, but it petrified me even more because I knew it wasn't a trick of the light. Something was there, lurking, dwelling in the dark corners of the office. Always just out of reach. I felt like I was being watched. Not knowing what else to do, I made my way back to the main desks. I could go nowhere else. When I walked back in, the sight that greeted me was beyond words, beyond anything normal. Every single person in the room was laying face down, face hugging their keyboards. Their heads, oh my God, their heads. They were all shriveled, like those perfectly preserved shrunken human heads that are used for grotesque rituals. It looked like they had been left out in the sun for too long, all desiccated. The skin was far too tight, the color a dirty brown, mummified. Their eyes were sunken, practically non-existent. A slimy, luminous liquid trickled out of their open mouths. I sunk to the floor, feeling so helpless, the tears falling like raindrops from my tired eyes. What was I to do? Then I heard a voice that I hadn't heard in 10 years. "You'll be okay, Delcy. I'm here for you." It was the voice of my brother Timothy. Timothy has been dead for 10 years. I covered my ears. "Please, leave me alone. I can't do that, Delcy. You need to come and look at me. See me." It sounded like my brother, only I knew that it wasn't. I was suddenly overwhelmed by this feeling I couldn't describe, that I didn't recognize. It was a terrifying craving. I wanted to see Timothy. I longed to see him. "Tim, is it really you?" I said, my own voice sounding so alien to me. "It's me, Delcy. Come to me." I saw the hideous shadows again. They have multiplied now. Lurking in the corners, but they were getting closer now. Before I could stop myself, I got up and like a robot, I walked toward my computer screen. Nothing else mattered now. My brother's voice whizzed like a roller coaster in my frazzled mind, so quiet and yet so convincing. I knew what I had to do. I just didn't know if I could do it. I'm sitting by my computer screen now. I haven't turned it on yet. I don't know what time it is. I do know that everyone around is now dead. I still can't get out and I still can't call the police. I'm writing this on my phone because I want there to be a record of what's happened here today, just in case I don't make it. There's only one thing left for me to do. I know that now. I realize it and I feel it in my heart, pulsating like a tumor. The only way out is to look.